Welcome back to another episode of the Empower Grief Journey podcast. I'm your host, Chris Mamone, and I'm an acceptance coach who helps people heal from grief, loss, and trauma to discover their self-acceptance and step into their personal power. This is your podcast, is your dedicated space for healing, growth, and transformation. Each episode shares insightful and inspirational stories along with practical tools and actionable insights that can help guide you along your healing journey. Today's guest is Heidi Prowse, OAM. She's a community advocate, author from Cambria, Australia. Heidi has spent over 15 years leading change in the community services sector with a focus on helping people navigate health challenges, mental health, and grief. Heidi's personal journey through loss after the passing of her husband Andrew to cystic fibrosis has deeply shaped her work and her message. She shares and brings a compassionate and thoughtful voice to conversations about resiliency, purpose, and finding light after darkness. Heidi invites us to explore the real, often messy parts of life, reminding us that growth and connection can be found even in the hardest of seasons. Heidi, I want to welcome you onto the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Likewise. And I just want to give you a chance to tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, well, so I'm Heidi, and yeah, I live in Australia, and I really love helping people. I have always had a real passion for, I think, getting in and supporting others. I grew up in a small country town in Australia. And I, went through a moment of my life where I was sort of trying to work out who I was and what I was going to do. And I went off into the big smoke and, just really fell into working for a charity. And it wasn't a plan, it was just something that I think my journey kind of led me to. And I think I immediately found my calling is that I could, get paid to actually help people. And that was pretty incredible. So here I am, many years later. I mean, only a few years. And yeah, I have already lived such a fruitful and incredible life, personally and professionally. And that has been because I think I've had a lot of faith in this pathway that I'll just naturally be on. And I often talk about it as, I think I know that there's a lighthouse at the end of the horizon, and I just keep an eye on it. I'm not necessarily, steering, captaining the ship to head towards land, but I know sort of the kind of direction that I'm going, and I sort of believe in that. And so throughout my life, I've been able to be afforded great opportunity. And one of those things was actually meeting my late husband. I ended up in Canberra, where I now call home. And I went to a party one night a friend was hosting, and I fell in love across a crowded room with someone that I did not really realize that had actually been in my life for a really long time. They'd gone to the same high school in that small country town with me. I'd even been to their house at one point, but they had never registered in my world until this night that I saw them across a crowded room. And I was immediately uh, head over heels and planning our future and our long time that we would be together. And he took me on a date and told me that we wouldn't have a long life together because he was living with cystic fibrosis.
That's a really very challenging health condition from what I've heard about it. But could you tell us a little bit for the audience and maybe people who don't know what cystic fibrosis is, just a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, cystic fibrosis is a genetic condition that you're born with. So now most babies are picked up in that sort of first couple of weeks of life where it's identified if they're carrying the gene for cystic fibrosis. And then it really means a lifelong treatment plan to be able to manage your cystic fibrosis. In terms of what happens in the body, basically all of our sort of sweat, salts, water type parts of our body overproduce salt. And so this causes the buildup of mucus in the lungs and certainly in other parts of the body as well, which obviously impairs them. So if you think about a day where you had a really bad cold, and your lungs were sort of filled up with that sort of goo. That's sort of the daily life of a person with cystic fibrosis. And so basically what they need to do is all of these things on a daily basis to help expel that mucus and to keep themselves as well as possible. Because if they're having that sort of daily load, they're much more likely to get infections, and that can cause internal damage. So there's been incredible changes in the medical world for people with cystic fibrosis. When Andrew, my husband, was born, his life expectancy was maybe around 17 years old. Then there was a very unique invention of breathing in salty air on a daily basis to help kind of shift the mucus, and that actually increased the life expectancy by sort of another sort of 10 to 15 years, which seems really simple, but was, such a phenomenal breakthrough. And so his sort of age group seemed to age as the life expectancy was sort of going up older than them, which was fantastic. And in more recent years, there are new medications that actually put a stopper in the genetic mutation from functioning incorrectly. So it stops that genetic mutation from doing the wrong thing and causing all of those issues in the body. It's not a cure, but it's a stopper. And so that can really put, I guess, a placeholder on how the body reacts. And is now potentially meaning that people with cystic fibrosis could live into their 60s and maybe, hopefully, go into aged care and, things that people with cystic fibrosis have never really had to think about.
What was Andrew's perspective on that? I know he grew up with this disorder that he had, and when he shared that with you, that he said, "I have cystic fibrosis," what went through your mind at that point? Was it a kind of like an unexpected, I'm not sure what this is or what to expect from this? You guys had a beautiful relationship. I remember our pre-interview that you shared a lot, that you guys did a lot of adventures together in life, and were very much soulmate level people in that relationship. But was that something that made you question things initially up front, or was it something that you were prepared to walk that path with him on?
Yeah, well, when he first told me, I did know. So, growing up in a small town together, he had been told to me actually by my mum, this young boy has cystic fibrosis, and that was really the extent of it. And that sort of moment in my life of my mum having that conversation with me meant nothing at the time, but for some reason still stayed in my memory. And so then when I met him, I knew that it was a thing, but I really didn't know anything about it. It certainly didn't slow down my heels from tripping up, and certainly thinking about the life that I wanted to lead with this person. Andrew was a very much, in the early days, a realist. So he was very, I think, pragmatic about the thing that he'd grown up with. He wasn't necessarily locked into timelines, but he did have an understanding that I think he felt was quite realistic and quite pragmatic, that his life would be shorter. And that was the way that he explained it to me, that his life would be shorter. Um, and so at that point, I was already all in, and it didn't feel like anything that would possibly stop me from wanting to be with this person. Um, if anything, I think that it made me love him so much more deeply and even more so because I knew that our time would be finite. And even though we didn't really know what the journey was going to look like for us ahead, what I did know was that this was the person that I wanted in my life because they immediately became my best friend. They became the person that I could laugh with inappropriately all the time. And, he shared in our wedding vows that he would make me laugh every day. And he certainly did that seemingly with ease. So I just felt that there were so many things that were pulling us together that this thought of not being able to be with him forever was certainly crushing, but was not going to mean that I was going to give up any moment that I could have with him.
Well, I love his vow that you just shared of making you laugh every day because I feel very inspired. I never got to meet Andrew, but I can just kind of pick up his personality, the way you're reacting today on camera. And I love
Yeah.
that he made you smile and laugh every day. And I think that's a very powerful testament to somebody that has a terminal marker on their life, to have that perspective and have that pragmatic approach to life. I think it's something very inspiring. And I love that that was his attitude.
Well, so many people I think internationally would know, it was May the 4th or May the Force be with you day just recently. And I'll share a little thing that kind of shows you the quirky and appropriate jokester that was my husband. So we had found out that he was in palliative care, and we, had known that that sort of time was going to come. But we planned a few things and we did some really great things together. We had a staycation in a hotel a few nights before he passed away, and that just meant I got him all to myself and I didn't have to share him with our fur baby dog, Monty. Um, but I remember the palliative care nurse sort of came, and a lot of things sort of changed really quickly. I went from having these conversations with him, the nurse coming to do sort of a check-in, and then him really having some sort of pain medication and falling asleep. And the nurse said to me, "Look, we're looking like we're probably at the end. We're looking at hours now." And I said to her, "Is he going to wake back up?" I didn't get to say whatever I thought I'd planned for our last conversation. And she said, she just sort of looked at, she didn't actually say anything. She just looked at me, and I thought, oh, I can't believe that we've had all these big moments and all these big conversations, and I don't even remember the last thing that I said to him. And everybody sort of left the room and they let me have some time with him, and his eye was just open a little bit, and I'm like, Andrew, wake up, come back to me now. um, and he sort of opened his eyes and he looked at me, and I said, "I love you so much." And he sort of took this big deep breath and he just says, "I know." And then he fell asleep. And that was our last conversation that we ever had. And that jerk Star Wars me. I can't believe it. So if you are a Star Wars fan and you've watched Star Wars The Emperor Strikes Back, there is this very dramatic part where there's all this sexual tension between Princess Leia and Han Solo, and they're not quite saying to each other that they love each other and not, and then he's about to get killed. And she says, "Hans, Hans, I love you." And he just looks at her and he goes, "I know." I
Andrew.
can't believe it. I can't believe it, right? He was meant to say, "I love you more," so that I could have said, "Well, I love you most, haha, I win." But that was not the conversation. So, even on our last most horrible day, he still made me laugh.
He just made me laugh with that one because I would never have thought of that.
Right?
What a jokester.
Right? Could not believe it. Could not believe it.
So, something I wanted to ask you about that's gotten brought up on this podcast in particular is the topic of anticipatory grief, because it's something that I never really paid attention to in my grief journeys I've been on very well. But I've talked to some people that have been in those situations a lot similar to where you were at of, I know this is coming. I don't know when because we can't predict this kind of thing, but trying to almost prepare yourself for that. And I think you kind of hinted at that a little of is this going to be my last conversation? Did I get to say what I want to say? Um, how would you describe your anticipatory grief with Andrew as that got close?
Well, actually, I experienced anticipatory grief for around 10 years because that's how long we were together. So when I first met Andy, in terms of cystic fibrosis world, he was incredibly healthy. He was doing really well. He very rarely had any sort of episodes that were causing him any grief. And so when our first sort of, I guess, maybe almost 12 months of our relationship, We were just a couple that, that he happened to do a bit of medication and that sort of thing. And we didn't really have a lot of, I guess, exposure to what was truly coming. And we had a very significant crisis sort of occur out of nowhere. And it sort of threw me completely into the healthcare world. Something happened that meant that he needed to be rushed to the hospital here in Canberra. It was something that they couldn't actually manage, so he was put on a helicopter and evac'd to Sydney. To one of the bigger hospitals that was there, and I was sort of left on the ground, holding our bags and thinking, what on earth do I do? And I got to Sydney, and the doctors didn't even look at me. I was this early girlfriend. They never even acknowledged that I was in the room. They talked directly to him, and it caused me such distress because I just didn't feel like I was a part of the conversation or the situation at all. And his parents came, and they were just incredibly calm, like they'd been through this so many times. They knew all of the right questions to ask, and I just stood like I was a part of the wall. And the doctors said to Andrew, you're going to need to have surgery, and there is a risk of 1 in 100 can have a stroke as a result of this surgery. Do you have a will? And he was, we were 25 at the time. Um, and it occurred to me. He said that he wouldn't be here he would have a shorter life than me. And here it was being told to me directly. And we had to have this awful experience of sitting in a hospital, young lovers at 25 years old. He was in a 4-bed ward, and I remember the gentleman next to him was snoring. The one across from us was listening to the TV on the loudest possible volume that it could have been on. And the gentleman across from us had gotten out off his bed to go to the bathroom and was wearing the hospital robe that was not tied up at the back. And I sat with this person that I had absolutely fallen in love with and had to write an emergency will. And Andy was so detailed. He's has always been someone who was very good at gifting. He was very considered, very researched, very thoughtful. And so this was going to be the ultimate gift that he could give to people. And so he went through just off the top of his head particular things that he owned and who he wanted them to go with. And I sat there and I wrote every single one of them down while thinking about the fact that tomorrow might be the day that I have to actually put this plan into action. And we did make it through that day, but it changed something in me. And initially I didn't really understand. I definitely felt a huge amount of fear and sorrow, but I just thought it was linked to this particularly horrible situation. I didn't expect it to linger. I didn't expect it as he sort of got a bit better after that situation. I didn't expect it to still sit at sit at the back of my throat or sit right in my guts. And I found that I threw myself into advocacy work, and I worked myself to the bone trying to help the cystic fibrosis community. I thought that I was doing something that, and it was profoundly phenomenal for this community, fundraising, convincing people to run around in bright red Speedos and wear Santa hats in the middle of winter and raise thousands to eventually $1 million for cystic fibrosis. But I did all of it completely at the expense of myself because there was a part of me that felt that I didn't deserve rest because I could handle it. I wasn't the one that was sick. But I also was very happy to be destructive to myself because if he wasn't going to have a long life, then I kind of didn't care if I had one anyway. And so it really took me quite some time to kind of realize what I was doing and that I wasn't feeling okay. And it actually was Andrew who said to me, look, you keep getting sick, you keep being unwell. I think you need to go to a GP, you need to go and talk to a doctor. And when I finally did, I sort of sat down with a doctor and we spoke a lot about my mental health. And it was such a relief to be able to share the way that I was feeling with someone because I didn't want Andy to know that I was feeling this way. But I was carrying all of it on every part of my shoulder and with every piece of my body. And I got to the end of this appointment with the doctor, and they'd written me out a plan to say, we think it would be good for you to go see a psychologist and continue to explore this. But she just held back the piece of paper for a moment and said, "You do realize that you're mourning him." And I went, "Sorry, what?" She said, "You're mourning him and he isn't dead." And it was just such a clear part of information that made so much sense to me because I was mourning the fact that I was going to lose him every single day, and that was why it was making me feel the way that I was feeling. And so the strategies that I decided to put in place from there was that I was going to decide that mourning would happen on another day. It would happen on the day when it could be done, and that I was going to focus on loving and being with and enjoying the life that we had together and really look at how I could create this quality of time that we would spend. And I, consciously made decisions that were really about the two of us living this fulfilling and an incredible life. And I made the decision, I'm not going to grieve him. I'm not going to grieve him until the day that I can grieve him because he's not here. And I still stand by making that decision because I had this, like I've said, this amazing and beautiful life and time with this person. And we did so many amazing and great things. And we really sort of pushed the bar sometimes. And, as I say, we drank from the glasses that you got for your wedding that people sort of leave for a special occasion. We drank our breakfast juice from those, We really lived that kind of life. And when he passed away, the grief that I had put off was so huge. It was so heavy and it was so big. And I never thought that I would come out of how horrible and how heavy it was. And when you're in that moment where you are sitting in the load of that grief, you just can't possibly imagine getting out of it. And I thought, maybe I should have given some of the grief away before I got to this point. But no, I really did make the best decision. I decided that anticipatory grief was going to be something that I would put to the side. And that's not necessarily something that you can just, flick a switch and do. I had to be mindful of it. I had to realize when it showed its presence, and I had to put a number of strategies in place that would enable me to think, okay, I know that I'm feeling this way because I'm fearful of that loss, or I know that loss is coming, or I'm already experiencing that loss. And I would usually use the strategy of spending more quality time with him. So we did lots of fun things like we would do 10-pin bowling and I'd thrash him. Uh, and, we'd both go get mani-pedis together and we would, just sit and watch Star Wars and, various Harry Potter and lots of different movies and things like that. So I really sort of went the way that I'm going to respond to the way that I'm feeling about that anticipatory grief is actually by spending as much time with him as I can.
I love that you shared that about anticipatory grief. You said something very powerful, and that's that anticipatory grief can come up in a various amount of different ways for people, and it's not going to be what I like to call a one size fits all box for everyone. It's going to be different ways you're already mourning that person. You're already mourning what's going to happen, and that can also take away the time that you're going to have with them, that you want to maybe say something or do something with them to have a lasting memory in that moment before that time
Mm.
arrives. So I love that you shared that you guys would watch movies in particular. I have to ask because I'm a Harry Potter fan. What was Andrew's house that he liked in Harry Potter?
Ravenclaw.
I love
He
that.
was 100% a Ravenclaw. Yep.
And what about you?
Well, so this is this is the real challenge as a Harry Potter fan. So because I was an early, I think I was 12 at the same time as the first Harry Potter movie came out. So I was the perfect age to grow up with it. And so when Pottermore originally came out, I did my sorting hat and I was sorted into Hufflepuff. And I thought, really? Oh, that's so embarrassing. But I ended up going, okay, this is the sorting hat has made its decision. Here I am, I'm a Hufflepuff. And I really embraced the values and what it is to be a Hufflepuff and that loyalty. And actually, for my hens party, all of my friends were sorted into their Harry Potter house, and then they had to come in basically that glitter glam. And we went on this big bus pub crawl around Sydney in Australia. And all of my friends were Hufflepuff. And I thought, okay, this is interesting. I've got this really great group of very loyal and very, humble and incredible people. I'm not surprised that they're the people I've surrounded myself with. There was not one Slytherin there, I would like to point out. Uh, but then Pottermore did a refresh, and you had to go in and do all of your sorting and everything again. And I was sorted into Gryffindor. And oh goodness, it really hurt. I thought now I have a like identity crisis. I don't know who I am, what I do, but yes. So yes, I feel like I very much have for a long time embraced the Hufflepuff code of conduct. But it is lovely now that I've got nieces and nephews that are just starting to and completing to read the book, and so they're very much sorting themselves into Gryffindor, which I'm sure that we would expect, and very much saying, well, Auntie Heidi, if the sorting hat has decided that you're in Gryffindor, then you must be there now.
I love that. I took an online sorting a hat thing. I'm trying to remember what my wife made me sign up for, but anyway, it was answering a lot of questions to figure out what
Yeah,
house you were in. And it was through the Harry Potter. There's a specific site to do it through. And I
yes,
did end up in Gryffindor, which I thought was awesome because
that is awesome.
I love the Gryffindor sword in the movie. That just like
Yeah,
steals it just I love the feel of that thing, the whole meaning behind it. The
yeah.
story behind Gryffindor. I love that. I'm trying to remember his name too. It's been a while since I've read the books. Um, but yeah, I love the purpose of that. But I have to say, you might still be a Hufflepuffle. I mean, if you ended up there in the first place, you might it's and you have all your friends that are Hufflepuff. So I mean,
Exactly.
it might be a thing there.
Yeah, I think
Uh,
so. But the funny thing is that there was, at a point, there was a vet in the US that had created a sorting hat quiz for your pet. And so I thought, well, this is brilliant. So I filled it out for my dog, Monty, who is my child. He is my baby. And I filled it out, and he got sorted into Slytherin. And I was
oh
like,
no.
I'm actually not even surprised. This dog is just so spoilt and so overly loved. And of course he gets sorted into Slytherin because he stamps his little foot at me at 2 minutes before the time that he gets fed. So
Ah,
I thought that was really
okay.
great. So in our household, a Ravenclaw, a Hufflepuff, and a Slytherin.
Well, it sounds like you have everybody from every house
Yeah,
in the family, which
exactly.
is it's just even better.
Exactly.
Uh, so Heidi, I wanted to ask you, the part of grief that I think a lot of people don't talk about is what happens after a loss. And I watched my grandfather pass away. I lost my son as a stillborn. I went through a massive grief process, different ways in those losses. What was it like for you after Andrew had passed? I know grief comes in waves and it's very different for everybody else, but were there certain moments that I like to call turning points for you in that grief journey where healing got just a little bit easier for you?
Hmm. So the way that I explain how I was feeling. So Andy passed away, and at the time I was actually the CEO of a mental health education not-for-profit. And
Mm.
I think that that role, I was in this community leadership role with quite a big profile in my community. So people had gone on this journey with Andy and I, and then ultimately to this point where he's passed away. So the way that I felt was like I was sitting at the bottom of a very deep, dark well, and I was all by myself. And I could look up and I could see that there was light at the top, but there was nobody there. And I thought, I am a capable woman. I know everything there is to know about mental health and putting strategies in place. I can get myself out of here. And I would scratch at the walls on a daily basis, just trying to push myself to get out of that well, because I didn't think that I needed to be there. And I certainly didn't want to because it felt horrible. I really lost a lot of my capacity to think. Not quite brain fog, but my brain just stopped kind of functioning. And for someone who's such a high achiever and such that has a huge amount of executive function, I really felt so lost, and actually I felt very dumb. I felt like I had become dumb. And I use that word very specifically because it was rolling around in my head. And I am also not much of a crier, and I just was leaking all the time. I would drive to work and I would just cry in the car, and I'd have a shower and I would cry. And I thought, I'm not even doing anything in particular, and these emotions are just coming out of me. And what a lot of people had said to me after Andy had passed away was be kind to yourself. And I didn't understand what that meant. I thought that was a really odd thing for people to say, because why would I be not kind to myself? Um, but I didn't really understand what they meant. And because I was, a leader in the mental health space in my community, I felt like I needed to activate the approach that we would recommend to people to follow, and that is to go and see a psychologist because of what you are going through. And in Australia, that is a really it's different, I think, to other countries where going and seeing a psychologist is very much not a stoic thing to do. It we really have more of a culture of, we suck it up and we deal with it because we're strong and we can do that. And so I knew that, in this role, I would tell somebody else that they should consider going to a psychologist at this point. And so my husband passed away on a Friday. On a Monday, I was at the doctor getting a referral to be able to go and see a psychologist. And within a few days, I was sitting with a psychologist that specialized in grief. And what I found I needed from them was to help me understand what was happening. So I would really just walk into that room and kind of give them a very high level, short summary of how I was feeling at that moment. And they would respond with, what's the evidence behind what happens in grief, and what is common for people to experience, and what might be some of the things, being able to help me name some of the things that I was feeling but couldn't quite place because I had never experienced them before. And I found that to be incredibly valuable. And I got to the psychologist at one point and I said to him, I just feel like I'm sitting at the bottom of a well and I'm ferociously trying to scratch my way out. And I don't understand why I can't get out because I should be able to get out. And he said to me, you know, I think that maybe you might just need to sit in the well for a moment and
Mm.
feel what you need to feel. And for the overachiever in me, I went, that doesn't sound like, aren't we meant to fight? Aren't we meant to, tally ho and get out of this and move forward or do something? And sitting seems like the completely opposite thing to anything that my body was feeling like it needed to do. And that's what I learnt be kind to yourself meant for me was you have experienced the greatest love that some people might never get to experience in their life. And the amount of love that you have for a person is equal to the amount of grief that you will feel when they are gone. And so, just as much as I had to enjoy and be mindful and be present for the love, did I need to sit and experience the loss. And I felt like I was sitting by myself down in that deep dark well, but I really wasn't. My mum in particular was standing at the top of that well, and she would abseil down and just sit with me for as long as I needed. And there were people that would take turns in coming and just being with me, not to sort of necessarily do anything in particular, but just to make me know that I wasn't alone. And that really did go on for quite an extended amount of time. I'd be saying more years than I would be saying, days or weeks or months. But I did get to a point where my brain slightly started to work again. And I gave myself a task. And I thought, I'm going to say yes to any event or thing that anybody invites me to. And it was after the first year anniversary of Andy passing away. And I think because we had spent so much time together, we'd been so connected, I was actually quite disconnected from the friendships and the relationships. And I thought maybe this could be a good thing because, gosh, it would be easy to sit at home and do nothing. But I decided that I would have a yes year. And so people would send me a message and say, would you like to come to this thing? And I'd go, yes. And I said yes to everything. And I found myself in some incredible rooms. I met so many people and it's interesting now that I have a lot of people in my life that have never met Andy. And that feels so bizarre. But I've found a whole world of people that have come into my life and created some really incredible new relationships. And they have and never will meet the most important person in my life. But I think that was a really nice exercise just to kind of say yes and just to kind of get out there and do something. And the other thing that I did was I planned in a completely outrageous holiday for the 1 year anniversary. I knew how much that was going to hurt. And so I did. I actually went to France and I went to the Champagne region. And I decided I will be in Champagne, drinking champagne on the 1 year anniversary after my husband has passed away, and he will be not surprised that is where I am and that is what I'll do. And I will stay in like a 5-star hotel that I cannot afford. And I will do this because I need to have that opportunity to celebrate his life and to acknowledge that in such a profound and phenomenal way. And if people don't know the story of Madame Veuve Clicquot, it's the bright yellow bottle of champagne. It's rather expensive as it sits on the shelf, but the story about Veuve Clicquot, because Veuve in French means widow. So her name is actually Widow Clicquot. And when she was in her 20s, her husband, who was running their vineyard in France, passed away suddenly. And this is in the like late 1800s. And so for a woman to even have a bank account was completely inappropriate. And she convinced her father-in-law to let her run the business because her husband had spent a lot of time teaching her and showing her all of the tricks of the trade. And she was very clever and very pragmatic. And so she ended up building this incredible champagne house and empire and an incredible marketing mogul. You know, she patented the color that the Verve champagne bottle is in and everything. I'd never heard this story. I'd never known about this person, but I had done a little bit of research and I had said to our tour guide, we're going to be in France. I'd really like to go to Verve, and this is why, because it's the 1 year anniversary. And they contacted me back and they said, well, we've had a conversation with Verve and they're going to take you on a private tour for the day. So my mum came with me, and we went one-on-one through this champagne house, and we learnt the story of Verve or Widow Clicquot. And I said to my mum, I think I much prefer to be called a Verve than I want to be called a widow.
I can't say I blame you. That's an incredible story. I mean,
Mm,
what are the odds of getting a private tour at a champagne chateau like that in France,
mm.
of all places? I mean,
It's
that's
it's
incredible.
completely outrageous.
But it makes sense to me because I think Andy would have appreciated that.
He would have loved it. And he also would have not been surprised a bit. I do seem to have a little bit of leprechaun luck or something that follows me around. But I also think that, like I said, I've always been someone who just allows life to happen. And I think a lot of the time some really great things do occur because I just say yes to them.
Well, one of my last questions I have for you, and this has been a beautiful podcast, by the way. I'm so grateful we got to talk today. Um, Share with our listeners, how has grief changed you going through this process? It sounds like, you knew getting together with Andy, this was going to be the challenge that was going to come. And so there was a lot of anticipatory grief over 10 years of period. But you had such a beautiful relationship with Andy. I can just feel the energy off you as we talk. And just the way you've celebrated him, and you've talked about going through a dark well, which I can resonate with you on that one. It's a place that you just say, I don't feel comfortable being here. This feels very heavy. I don't want to be here. You're trying to get out all the time. How has grief changed you today when you look back on where this journey's taken you? How's grief changed you?
I have seen grief as something that has been an incredible lesson. And I think often it's not something that we want to experience, but being able to be in a position now where I can feel very grateful for the lessons that grief has taught me. It's taught me lessons about love. It's really taught me about, as I say, how to live in a way that's so fulfilling and really values the relationships of love, whether they're intimate or whether they are friends and family or people that you come into contact with, really having an appreciation and love and curiosity in the world. It's taught me a lot about life and the legacy that I want to leave behind myself. It's certainly I've done a lot in my life and I thought maybe I peaked too early. Um, but it's nice to now be in a space where I've got these big ideas around the next big thing that I want to do to help people in the world and to really change other people's lives for the better. It's taught me a huge amount about leadership, about being someone who really can lead with empathy and understanding, and have a real knowledge and a real sense of who I am in the world and the space that we all live in, and to be able to be a better leader to walk alongside people that I maybe work with or I do things with in the community. And it's also taught me a lot about death. It has made me think very differently about this thing that is going to happen to us all. I've spent a lot of my life being very fearful of what that might be and what it might look like. And while I'm someone who I would say I'm not really religious, it's really made me, I think, have more of a spiritual connection with the world around me and what that reality does mean. It's made me think a lot more around, um, yeah, get like what I really want to do and what I want to get out of the time that I have here. Um, and I think all of those things are an incredible blessing. Um, and I think a lot of the world have the privilege of not learning those lessons until it's very late. And so what I hope to do is to share some of the lessons that I've learnt and the experience that I have so that people don't have to experience the pain to learn them, but can certainly live life with the benefits of waking up every day and being so grateful for seeing your person, for being so happy that the toilet seat is up because that means that they're alive and well. Um, it's all of those things that I think we can often take for granted because we do forget that our time on this planet is only for a moment, really.
That is beautifully said, Heidi. And I will comment on that a little bit because that's something that in my family is always frowned upon kind of thing, but it happens. It's those little things about that person we were so connected to that when they're gone, we miss. And
Yeah.
that can be as simple as their voice or in Andy's story. I just have to give him credit for this. I know as your last word.
Yeah.
Star Wars and somebody. Got to give you points for that, Andy. Like,
Exactly.
but it's just those little things that we miss, and we're not going to get back. And it's always, a reminder in a sense when we experience those after loss. So I appreciate you sharing that. Um,
Thanks.
Heidi, I just want to say this has been a true honor and a true blessing to have you on the Empower Grief Journey podcast today. I think you have shared a beautiful story about you and Andy and your life together and what you've learned through grief, how you've navigated grief, and how that's empowered you to move forward in your life and take those big risks, go after those very expensive trips in life because you may never get the opportunity to do it at another time and to live
Exactly.
your life to the fullest. So I really just want to say thank you so much for being a guest on the show today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And certainly to your listeners, if they have liked some of the stories that I've shared and would like to read a little bit more, I have just published my own book, which is available on Amazon, and it's called We Should Have Grown Old Together. So a few of the stories that I touched on today are in there, but there are a whole bunch of others from the roller coaster ride that Andy and I went on. But it also is packed with self-reflection exercises. So if you're on the journey yourself, you can not only laugh and cry with us on our journey, but you can also look inward for yourself as well.
And Heidi, that brings me to my last two questions. I always wrap up the podcast with. The first one is that if you run into somebody who is going through grief or feels stuck in grief, what's one thing that you could say to them that would help them navigate that just a little bit easier?
The thing that I say is, I know that you feel like the grief is never going to not be as heavy as it is, that it feels like the most horrible thing that you've ever experienced. And I don't understand why, but it does get lighter. I promise you that it gets lighter.
That's beautifully said because in the throes of grief, things can feel very heavy. And your analogy of a well, sitting at the bottom of a well, looking upwards at this little tiny hole, grief can feel that way. It really can. And it can
Yeah.
feel that way for a very long time. And so that was beautiful advice that you shared. I wanted to ask you as well, if people are listening to this podcast and they want to connect with you, where can we find you?
Yeah, so I have my own website, which is heidiprowse.com.au. So they can find all of the books that I have, all of the various bits and pieces of different things that I do. I've just created a Not Your Average sympathy card range. So poems that I've written in those moments of grief so that, when you're trying to send a card to someone and you don't know what words to use, I've written them for you. And so all you need to do is pop your name on the inside and pass that on. So some of that advice and those words that I've felt for myself and being able to pass that along. So they're all available on my website. So that's heidiprowse.com.au.
Well, Heidi, thank you so much today. I also want to thank our listeners for joining Heidi and I on today's episode of the Empower Grief Journey podcast. If this episode resonated with you, please share it with somebody you know who could benefit from Heidi's story. For more episodes that are designed to empower you and support you during your grief journey, visit empowergriefjourney.com and subscribe to this podcast. You can find us on Apple and Spotify. The Empower Grief Journey is all about honoring your journey, embracing your emotions, and finding strength in your own time. You're never alone on this journey, and together we can navigate grief with courage and compassion. Until next time, be kind to yourself and take your grief journey one step at a time.